You're listening to the ABC Music Talk podcast, the show for anyone interested in the music industry. This is the second and final part of the episode about the founder of JJJ Vinyl, a new UK-based second-hand record shop and now record club. If you missed part one, please go back and listen to that to get an idea of what is to come, or just sit back and listen to the completion of the journey. But before you go, don't forget to go road to your videos. Rota is for artists, managers, labels, or anyone in the music industry who needs to create video content for promotion or monetization. Rota makes it fast, easy, and inexpensive to do all of that in one place. Head to www.abcmusic.co and click the Rota logo on the homepage to access a 10% off discount for the service. Wonderful. Okay, so let's change tack slightly. And I want to dive into your career, if that's okay. So the first job was at an A&R department at a record company. That must have felt like winning the lottery at the time. I mean, how did that come about?
I think all I just knew was I was a music obsessive. All I knew was a music obsessive. It just felt right. And I think I didn't start as, oh, you're an A&R guy. It started as do the press packs, do the photocopying, send out the post. So it never felt like, wow, I'm an A&R guy. It was like, I did all those menial jobs that you do at record labels, and then I went to loads of gigs, and I'd tell someone at work who I saw if I thought they were good or not.
How did you get into the assistant job in the first place?
You wrote letters.
That was okay.
Yeah, wrote letters for work experience placements, and then when you were there, you're thinking, I'm not going to go. I'm going to show them in these 2 weeks that I am going to be a huge asset to their company. That's a lie. I didn't sit there and think that. I think what happened is that I went in there and I showed them my enthusiasm for music, and they're like, okay, can you stay on for a while longer? So I did 9 months at a little heavy metal record label called Music for Nations, just 1 day a week. And then from there I wrote letters, and I got a job at Mushroom Records with Corda Marshall and Max Lusardo and Stuart Camp, manager of Ed Sheeran, who was one of the marketing managers at Infectious, which was part of the Mushroom Group. And I joined just as they were making a lot of redundancies. So I feel I just lucked out, because they're like, okay, we've got rid of all these people, we need someone to do some work. Mm-hmm. So I just stayed on, cash in hand. I don't know if I should say that. And got myself busy. I went to gigs every night. I was still living at home and just spent my nights in Camden, when Camden was just a buzz with gigs every night.
And it was at this label where you signed some artists that are incredible. The Darkness?
You know, I still sit a little uneasy and uncomfortable with thinking I signed The Darkness, and I feel it's because it was just such a big team of people that did it.
Sure.
I played a part in that team. I was the first person to see them. I was the first person to see them a second, third, fourth and fifth time, and then I eventually managed to bring people down. I introduced them to the manager, Sue. I played a big part.
I think you can take that.
No, I still sit a little.
I know what you're saying, because ultimately these bands are thinking about their next steps, right? So a personal relationship is one thing, but they have to start thinking about, okay, if I'm going to go with that record label, what is it? What is that label going to do? You know, for me. And to your point, I know what you're saying. You're saying they came in and they met some other people, right? And they went, yeah, okay, this feels like the place that I could take my career.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
But you signed it. That's how I see it.
It's anyone says the word sign, I always just think of, I didn't sit down there with a bit of paper and give it to them and say sign on this dotted line. That was the lawyer. But I played a part in the team that signed the Darkness. This was all just as the Mushroom was being acquired by Warner Music.
Okay.
And I wasn't told this, but the Darkness turned around to Corda and said, if Joel isn't guaranteed a job at Warner Music,
nice.
We're not signing to you. So we then merged with East West, and we remained as East West for a while, and then we changed the name to Atlantic Records. Mm-hmm. And then that's when I felt, okay, I'm an A&R guy. And it was really them and Funeral for a Friend who were my passion. Mm-hmm. Welsh rock band who I really, because the Darkness were signed with an album all ready to go. Funeral for a Friend needed to make their records, so that's when I got into the whole world of producing them, studios and mixing and all that. And I felt with Funeral for a Friend, I could spend a little bit more time in the studio and say, well, why don't you try this? And why don't you try that? Because they were very screamy, very heavy bands. And I was trying to somewhat polish them up for a major label. And I remember times when I'd go into the studio when the rest of the band were at the pub or out and change some bits to songs, and then they'd come back and they go, what's happened? I said, I've turned it into a hit. And you've turned it into Busted. But they had a real good run.
They really did. Yeah, they really did. And wait, so you were actually in the recording studio messing around with mixing desks and
with the producer, Colin Richardson,
right.
Fantastic rock producer. I never had any kind of... I knew what parts needed to go where. There was a particular song of theirs which they demoed, and it was very long and very messy, and I was like, we're going to chop that bit, chop that bit, chop that bit, convince the singer to sing a part instead of screaming it, and before you know it, we had their biggest hit.
And I guess that awareness of song form can only have come from all of your exposure to the variety of different acts that you listen to as a young person.
Absolutely. And also being such a big fan of different types of music, knowing these bands never quite worked because they never knew how to tame their extremities, and thinking if they could just cut this and do this and do this and do this, it will still be outside of music, but we could have a little shot of the charts, just have that little bit of a, and we did, and it was great. And I made 3 records with them as an A&R manager, and then I worked with Paul Samuels, who's still at Atlantic Records, an incredibly legendary A&R man, and one of the most biggest advocates and workers for Love Music, Hate Racism. An artist called Get Cape, Wear Cape, Fly, which is Sam Duckworth.
Which is one of the best names for a band ever.
Do you know, I told him, I said, I've got an idea where you got your name from. And he goes, you will never guess.
Okay.
I said, I'm going to guess. Because I said, the language it's written in really reminds me of the computer game magazines that I used to read as a kid, and it sounds like a cheat or like a walkthrough, and it sounds like something from like a Batman game. Get Cape, Wear Cape, Fly. Yeah. And he goes, oh my God, you've guessed it. How did you guess it? I go, because we're the same. Yeah, well, he's a bit younger than me, but I'm sure we read the same sort of computer game magazines. And he goes, that's it. It came from like a computer games magazine. He may have just been said that just to appease me. I don't know, but
I think that sounds very likely.
But we made 1 record, but he. It's funny because when I think of Sam, who is now very big on Twitter and a big Black Lives Matter advocate, doing a lot of good. It was a big part in the covered Grenfold a lot. He's someone I admire so greatly, and yet I feel ashamed's such a strong word, but I'm just regretful we knew each other when I was in my mid to late 20s, and I didn't meet him for the first time now, because I'm sure we would have a very different relationship. Because when I speak to him now, I always have this apologetic tone for him knowing me at a time when I was not a particularly nice person.
Why do you say that?
I was drinking a lot. I was, I just wasn't. I had different priorities in my life, and I look back now and realise that some of the conversations we had about music, and what I felt he needed to do for his career was based more on what I thought he needed to, and less on what he wanted to. And I think it's a big fundamental difference. I look back now and I'm very regretful of some of the things I said and some of my attitudes. And I truly hope one day I'll be able to tell him this in person. He's an incredibly smart, articulate, passionate. He's a man I admire so much. Anyway, so yeah, I was. He's just and he made an incredible debut record, and one I'm very proud of to have played a small part in. And he went on to make some more incredible music. He's an incredibly important artist in the UK. Don't think he gets the full recognition he deserves. His music, but his activism work is incredible, incredibly inspiring. Yeah,
absolutely. Okay, and so I guess at this point in your career, do you feel pretty bulletproof? You've signed some incredible acts, commercial successes. You're working at one of the biggest music companies in the world, as in it got moved into Atlantic, or became part of Warner. The fact that you were able to, I think, fairly early on in your career, move from that into setting us up as a consultant, and then having an incredible client list like the Mama Group, Parlophone, and Roadrunner. How did you feel at that time, like sort of being able to just sort of be the master of your own destiny in some respects?
It was the worst time of my life. It was the worst time of my life. Okay. I felt bulletproof up until the moment Atlantic Records let me go. Because I was, not dissimilar to what I was saying a moment ago with Sam Duckworth and Get Cape, I wasn't a particularly nice person. I'd let all that sort of sense of those early achievements get to me. I was not so passionate about music anymore. I was just thinking I was just the bee's knees, and I learned some really important lessons very quickly when I got let go from Atlantic, because it was not my choice to be let go. And I was confronted by not having a job in an industry where reputation is key, and I realised that I had not a great reputation, and I learned some lessons very fast, and I learned even more later on, really. I think I managed to get some consultancies. Some of them didn't last very long. They look good on a CV, but if you look at the small print, I was only there for about 4 or 5 months. I worked briefly at Mama Group to do some promoting, and I hated promoting because that was the very key element of you need to make money. Mm-hmm. And that gnawed at my soul about what music was about. And it was a big learning curve. And I was just doing all bits and pieces. I was doing a bit of consulting, a bit of A&R, a bit of management. But then the real next thing that kind of took off was the band management, because I had a band that finally began to get some traction.
Yeah, so let's talk about that then for a second. So to me, being an A&R manager and being an artist manager, they're almost like cousins in terms of job roles in some respects. Did you feel like that? Did you feel like you could be a better manager because you could understand how an A&R manager might be looking at the band that you're representing? Or
Absolutely. Yeah. You take your previous skills, and I always say to people, I want to be a manager, but I don't know what to do. I say, well, no one knows what to do, but what you do is bring what you know to that band and take care of the other stuff they don't want to do. That's all that managing is, and then you learn as you go along. So I took all my A&R skills, A&R skills, but I had an idea of...
They are skills. I mean, I have this thing where I don't really... to me, A&R is witchcraft. I've said it before on the podcast, because you gave us that example earlier on about going in when the band are down the pub and changing a few things with the producer. That is a skill. It's an undeniable skill, and it has a commercial element to it, right? Because you are thinking about how might radio receive this, or how might it sort of come across on a record within the sort of time format that records were, if you like. Kind of that's changed a little bit in the digital world. Records are shorter these days, it seems, because of streaming. But yeah, no, I think that is a real skill.
You're right, and I belittled it for reasons I don't know, but I
think a lot of people in the industry get a little bit like that after a while.
Well, I think so much of it is based on luck. So much of it is based on, because I could have made those changes and they wouldn't have worked. Mm-hmm. But we don't hear that story because it didn't work. But we hear this story because that one just happened to work. Success
has many fathers.
Yeah.
Failures are
orphans. I did bring what I had learned from my experience at a label. I feel more comfortable saying that, actually. Funny, I brought my experience of working at a label and brought it to management, and then just managing a band was the biggest learning curve. Biggest learning curve, because there's all those other elements, the live, publishing, dealing with the label. And I think when I look back now, I think the challenge I faced was I only worked with one successful band, and they were my whole thing, and I tried making it work with some other bands. It didn't quite work. I'd work with a band and it wouldn't be working, but I'd feel a loyalty, so I'd stick with it, and then before I knew it, I'd spent 18 months with a band not working, thinking, well, that was a lot of hard work, where I could have just gone, this is not working after a couple of months, let's find something else. But I believed in sticking with something. Let's make it work. We can make it work. Because that's what happened with the Joy Formidable. I managed them for 2 years with very little success. Well, big commercial success. I took them I say I took them. I guided them through a part of their career where we were an unsigned band selling out 1,500 capacity venues in London. We toured America twice, Australia, Japan, all as an unsigned band, throughout Europe as an unsigned band. So that was a lot of work and a lot of schedule, a lot of things to schedule just as one person.
So was all that being funded through things like ticket sales?
Ticket sales, we would do merchandise. We just the occasional sync, and when a sync would drop, it'd be like, oh my god, finally, we can afford to hire a van
rather than borrowing somebody's car.
Rather than borrowing a car, but I didn't pay myself.
Mm-hmm.
I was still somehow making money from consultancies here and there, and occasionally a sync would come in, I'd have a little bit of money to see me through the next month. And then I think when we signed to Atlantic Records, Atlantic in the US, we signed to Steve Wabowski, who signed The Strokes and the Kings of Leon. Back in the day, he signed Soundgarden, and he worked with Talking Heads. The man is a legend.
Wow.
When we signed to Atlantic, I think I did what a lot of bands did, which is go, and now we can relax.
Yeah.
And that's really when I should have stepped up a gear.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a really tumultuous time, because the band, they felt entirely comfortable being on a major label. But I'm like, this is great, we're on the major label, and not just that, the one I used to work for, this is going to be great. Yeah. So there was an occasional these disagreements where, unsurprisingly, the arguments or the disagreements, where I said I think the label were right, would be remembered, because it goes, of course you would agree with the label, you used to work with them. I'm like, but no, but they make a good point. So there's all those little rifts, and we weren't then very good at repairing those rifts, and things would build up, and I was overworked. It's about surrounding yourself with good people, and I was reluctant about joining a management company, and I eventually did, and it didn't work out. And then when that ended, again, I wasn't in a good space myself. I was drinking too much, smoking too much weed, and I could see this end again coming. But I wasn't going to be the one who was going to make it. I wanted to not be the one that ended the rift, but not dissimilar to Atlantic, where I kind of saw these things fitting into place. I felt somewhat taken by the current of it, and I couldn't understand why I felt like I couldn't just take the initiative and step out when I could have, but I just was washed away by this current, and then it ended, and then that was the beginning of some really, really challenging years of really important personal growth. But yeah, I continued to manage a couple of bands, one whom I still think are one of the best bands I ever worked with, which was a band called Night Engine, who are still going now, and they've changed their name to Artificial Pleasure, who are, I think, are really unfortunate because they're around at the wrong time, because if they were around 15 years ago, they would be one of the biggest bands in the world right now. But very 70s, early 80s, post-punk, think Associates, think Talking Heads, an incredible act. And I managed them for 2 years, and it was not dissimilar to the Joy Formidable. We were just getting somewhere, and then the band unfortunately let me go, and I thought, I'm here again. There seems to be a pattern emerging here, and it seems the only variable is me. So I found myself in a really not a good situation after I kind of really left the management game.
Mm-hmm. And then you ended up running the label that you first started at.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
So I at the time I was living on friends' floors, spare rooms, doing a lot of dog sitting, dog and cat sitting. So a friend would go on tour, I'd look after their house, look after their dog. And I was looking after a couple of bands here, nothing that was making anyone any money, but it was always the same, a meeting here, we love this band, we're going to sign them, this is brilliant, the breakthrough I want, no return calls for a couple of weeks, and you kind of go, this is just heartbreaking. But I was always keeping up with the meetings, and I remember this specific meeting, I didn't have enough money for the tube, so I walked 3 miles up till Camden to meet up with an old associate, a guy called Andy Farrow, who's a big metal band manager, because I heard he was in town with one of his bands. I wanted to blag some tickets for one of his bands, and I thought, I don't want to just send an email, let's go see him, have a catch up. And he said, I've just been at Sony, I'm finding it really frustrating. Sony have a lot of catalogue from the bands I manage, and they're not doing anything with it. And all this catalogue was on Music for Nations, which was acquired by Sony 15 years earlier. So he goes, you should go down and speak to them. which I did, and I had a very good first meeting, and I always remember this first meeting because it was with someone who said, here's the list of all the bands we have catalogued for, and I don't know any of these bands. And he handed me the bit of paper, and I'm like, I grew up with these bands, I know these bands, I know some of them personally, I could do some great reissues. So I started a reissue campaign for Sony Music under the Music for Nations name, and not dissimilar to those very first work experience placements. I'm thinking I'm not going to go, because what started off as you can do 10 hours a week, I was like, okay, can I have a desk? And they go, there's really no need for you to have a desk. I'm just going to sit here. Can I have an email address? There's really no need for an email. It's a Joel.death, no apostrophe, and so I just didn't make myself go. And then I got more and more involved in not just reissues, but then Sony Germany would be releasing the new Amon Amarth album. Great Viking metal band. And everyone at Sony's like, I don't know what to do with this. I go, I'll do it. Mm-hmm. Amon Amarth have their biggest album in the UK the first time, in 20-year career. And then I'd get involved in more reissues beyond Music for Nations. And then we just built up the label. I got more hours, I got my department, and it got to the point where we were going to expand into more than just a reissues label, but a label signing new acts. So we grew, and we expanded.
That's such a wonderful story. I really really love that, because it's sort of as you began it feels like you kind of fell back in love with that fascination with the industry again, having sort of been almost spat out the other side.
But what I found myself happening with Music for Nations is I found there was a familiar pattern with myself being in a position of what should have been great strength, but then finding myself in a position again where I was let go, which was a pattern that I'd seen myself happen at Atlantic, happen with The Joy Formidable, happen with some of the other bands I managed, and now it's happening despite the nice almost fairy tale aspects of it coming back around after 20 years, relaunching the label and running the label that I had started at Music for Nations, again after 4.5 years, after expanding, acquiring a new head, who then I worked under. I then found myself again in a position where I was let go. Mm-hmm. And that again led to a lot of self-examination, self-reflection, self-thought, because the only variable in all those things was me. The only variable in all those positions, be it an A&R manager, be it a band manager, be it a marketing label manager, for all different companies, the only thing that's the same there was me. So why is it that I'm now finding myself back in this position of not having the job, not taking it to the next level? Why am I being let go of? Why am I not leaving? If I'm unhappy, why am I waiting to be taken away by that tide? Why am I not stepping up and deciding to move on? Mm-hmm. And this, only happened about 15 months ago, so I'm still in somewhat that period of self-reflection. Mm-hmm. But it's led to what I do now, which is somewhat the shop, but also my new career. And exactly, the new career. So let's talk about that, because presumably there's a relationship between that period of self-reflection and what you're now retraining to be. So tell us about that. So as someone who spent a large proportion of their adult life in therapy when I could afford it, and when I couldn't afford it, unfortunately, either self-medicating or self-medicating with alcohol or with weed or a prescription antidepressant, which I think work for some people wonderfully, and I think for other people perhaps do not work well as the talking therapies. I've always seen the benefit of therapy. And I thought when I reached 40, after 20 years in the music industry, and after again finding this pattern where I have been let go, what is the issue perhaps is with me, because I'm the only variable. What can I now do to retrain? I'm 40 years old. Music has very much moved on from guitars, alternative music. The world of streaming is very much focused on more pop and urban. And so what is it I can do? So I decided to retrain as a psychotherapist. And this interview is on the Day after I completed my
Well, I was going to say,
first term.
how far are you into it?
Not my first term, my apologies, my first year. So I've ended my first year of 4 in total, my apologies. And I train I train with a centre that specialises in something called attachment-based psychoanalytic psychotherapy. And this is still very much psychoanalysis, so in the foundations of Freud. But the method is very much based on the findings and work by John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth and many other modern psychoanalysts who focus very much on the attachment base, and that refers to the attachment a child will form with its attachment figure, which more often than not is the mother, but sometimes it's not. And those early years that a child will form a relationship with the attachment figure, how that then sets up much of how they will then deal with life. And I'm 1 year into my 4-year course. I have learned more about myself than at any other time in my life. I'm grateful for the fact that I hit 40, and instead of some of those cliched midlife crises of buying a bike and dating someone half my age, I'm self-reflecting. I've become vegan. I'm now sober as of almost 3 years. I got involved with activism work and just tried to lead I think more than a more positive life, more than any of those things, a more fulfilled life. One where I can feel more content and accept life for all those ups and downs and not feel overwhelmed, which I felt the majority of my life. There was never just a challenge that had to be met and overcome. Everything was a disaster. And I think I've learned more recently that there is nothing that has happened that no one has had to face before, and been able to deal with a dignity and a strength that will only help them deal with that challenge again further in life. So, yeah, just sort of working on myself.
It sounds like it's a very happy pairing in terms of, how to fill your life full of...
I thought you were going to say it sounds expensive, and I assure you it is.
Undoubtedly.
Well, you have to go back into therapy and the course itself, but
Right. Interesting. And so, presumably, though, the idea of starting the record shop is something that you see continuing on in tandem with that new career when you eventually complete your 4 years and decide to practice it. Is that the plan, or
I've learned to never predict what's going to happen in the future.
All right.
I've learned just to never say one thing, because inevitably, when I've always thought something is going to be something for much longer, it doesn't. I put my targets on, I will continue to do something that continues to give me this fulfilled, content life that I feel at the moment. I imagine it will involve continuing and trading, selling records.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine that, of course, because it's what I'm doing now. But then at the time I thought I'd be doing A&R for the rest of my life. I'd be a band manager. I was going to be the new Paul McGuinness, I was going to be the new Steve Wabowski. I was going to be all those things. At the moment, I've just learned just to go, well, I'm doing this course. One hopes it would lead to me being a fully trained psychoanalytic psychotherapist, and I can sell some records as well. But that's how I feel at the moment. That very well may change in 6 months' time.
Fair enough. Because I was curious as to whether or not, if you do go on to practice, let's put it like that instead, whether your experiences of working with, the very sort of human side of the business, which is the recording artist, performing artist. Do you think that those experiences of seeing, as you mentioned, I think at the beginning, people in the music industry are often quite troubled individuals in some respects, right? The artists themselves, at least that's the art is a reflection of that, or their way of communicating it. Do you think that makes for a great psychotherapist?
One term one phrase that we learned very early on in our training is, what you need to become is a good enough therapist. As soon as you start thinking in terms of great therapist or the best therapist, you don't get what you need to become. So I just wanted to say that, because unlike trying to be the best A&R person, these are all kind of capitalist driven, money making drives, but when it comes to therapy, it's not about getting someone in and out as quick as possible. If it takes them 30, 40 years to live a content life, that's how long you'll see someone for. But as regards to your question, I apologise. That was a little pedantic, but I just wanted to pick up because I love that term. Because as someone who had very little educational experience beforehand, to be told it's just about becoming a good enough therapist, it made me realise that, I can do this. But if someone said it's about becoming the best therapist, I'd be like, well, I'll never become that. So yeah, I apologise. But back to your initial question, I think undoubtedly the industry is going through a moment of reflection, of understanding that the very people that are creative are also often the very people who are dealing with trauma, and music was their way of dealing with trauma. Now that doesn't account for everyone. I'm sure there are some very healthily attached individuals who go on to be creative, but there is a pattern. Why are we losing some of our most incredible musicians and artists to drink, drugs, depression and suicide? Why are we losing them? Why is it that these people find it difficult to handle many of the pressures that come with what comes with being a successful artist? At what point does the industry step back and go, are we encouraging this? Or are we enabling this? Should we stop? At what point do they go, there must be an intervention? In the back of their minds, are they thinking, if there is an intervention, does it then stop the flow? Is in the back of their minds thinking, we can't afford to put them into rehab or to see them? I don't know. But I think having my experience of being in the music industry, I think the experience of having those questions even occur to me makes me think that I can't be alone in having those questions occur to me.
It was kind of my next question, so I appreciate that. So, I mean, the music industry can be a pretty unforgiving place, certainly very competitive. And I mean, I've so far on this podcast, which is 7 months old, I think, I've done 2 mental health episodes specifically, and certainly both revealed, these are people that have been in the industry for, as long as you and I have. And the industry that we entered is not the industry that it is today, thankfully. At least there's a better awareness that's going on. And is there some part of you that feels like actually you can really contribute now to the industry through this kind of retraining, because there is a better awareness, there is an opportunity for somebody who's given it some thought?
I still don't know how much I want to be in the music industry, and that's in no way reflection. That's not me answering your question critically, not me saying I don't know if I want to be in the industry because it's so bad. It's just my personal preference. I enjoyed my 20 years. I still actually do a couple of little consultancies on the side, but they are very different from what I used to do in the past. When I become a good enough psychoanalytic psychotherapist, do I then want to go back into the music industry to either offer my services or give talks or all those sort of things? Honestly, I don't know.
Right, so it's not that you're doing it because you think, I will specialise in helping people that either are professionals in the industry from a sort of commercial point of view, or artists. It's just a general change to involve yourself in other parts of the community.
Yeah, I think there's a few things that came to mind when you spoke, but neither of them are I want to specifically work with musicians. One of them is working with, I think, a lot of confused young men whom I think are really struggling. I think there's not a lot of good, very positive role models for young men at the moment. I think rightly so, there's a lot of very positive female role models. We have been in a patriarchy for white supremacist patriarchy world for quite some time, and that does need rebalancing. But we can't forget that there is a lot of strength that can come from being a confident young man, just like there's a lot of strength that can come from a confident young woman. And I think there's a lot of old parental habits that are not in parallel with a lot of modern world thought. And there's a lot of young men growing up with hearing a lot of old sayings, a lot of old thoughts and old ways and old methods of dealing with the world and being confronted by a very different message, and they're confused. Some of them then take that confusion into anger, and either they deliver that anger outwardly and attack, or they deliver it inwardly and they get depressed. I want to speak to a lot of young people who remind me of myself at that age, confused, because I knew that when I entered into therapy it did me a lot of good, and I would like to work with confused young men. The other one is to be able to use my training outside of the UK into places where perhaps psychoanalytical training is not prevalent or not affordable, and that kind of gets into my activism work, and that is also in the UK. The training centre I train at, they actually have a programme for people where they can see a psychotherapist for £5, which is considerably cheaper than your usual therapy session. I think that's vitally important. Therapy should be for all. It should be a way for people to have access to prolonged mental health redevelopment. I think that's vitally important. So those are the two aspects that immediately come to my mind. One feels that once I am trained, there might be a part of me that will rely on some of my old marketing methods and reach out to some people within the music industry. And there's a wonderful collective called the Music Industry Therapist Collective, who specifically help, not specifically, they have many clients, but they do talks within the music industry. I know them. I very well may have a conversation with them. If they want a conversation with me once I'm fully trained, who knows? They might be, they might not be interested. I don't know. I would never presume such a thing. Who knows? I just know that, especially what we're going through at the moment with... Is this the first time Corona's been mentioned? How long have we been going for? This is unbelievable. I think it is.
I think I got it in at the very beginning.
Okay.
No, I said COVID-19, so you can go with Corona.
Okay.
You can have that.
Saying COVID is so much. I think COVID-19.
Well, I'm forever retro.
I think we are entering a phase of a lot of difficulty. We've only just entered. There's still this sort of, this is all quite new, difficult but new, and very soon it's going to be coming. There's going to be some very deep-rooted traumatic experiences, especially when the country goes into what is likely going to be quite a severe recession and depression. There will be a lot of people who are experiencing things now that will only begin to surface in about 3 to 4 to 5, 10 years' time. I want to be there to help people through that. So all those things come to mind if I'm fortunate enough to pass my training. But I guess I'll have to sell some records in the meantime to pay for the training.
Very good. So this podcast, I kind of originally aimed it at new entrants to the industry, so I'm trying not to go with the word young there, and my memory was always meeting people that spent their time talking to me and telling stories, and that was kind of most of the good learning that I did. As a sort of close to all of this, what would you say to somebody who's coming into the industry for the first time, given kind of the journey that you've described during this episode?
What are your motives? Why are you doing this? Why do you want to get involved in the music industry or any industry? What are your motives? Knowing those, I think, is so important, because at any point you feel uncomfortable, you feel, is this because this is different from my motives? The times that I have been most discombobulated are times when I was so furthest apart from my original motives. You have enough time on this earth to become rich, happy, or make a difference. And know them. None are bad, but they all have different means to get there, and they can change. But just know why you want to achieve something, why you want to do something. I wanted to work with bands, and I remember saying it so early, and it's so embarrassing sometimes, but when my parents, and especially my dad, was like, what on earth are you listening to? You can't even make out what they're saying. They are screaming. Don't get it. And I was like, I'm going to work with these bands and I'm going to make them popular. And with Funeral for a Friend, I achieved that. Not so with The Darkness, they're a little bit more commercial, obviously, but that was a big driving force for me. So, I wanted to do something that was, change perceptions. But what are your motives? Keep to them. For me, it was a passion for music. A real passion of wanting to understand the process. How does someone be in a band? How do they become successful? How do you maintain that success? Because sometimes it's quite easy to be super successful very quickly, but holding that and maintaining that into a career, that's a challenge. Do the band want to change? What are the band's motives? Are your motives and the band's motives, the artist's motive, are they in tune? If they're out of tune, if you both want to achieve different things, that could be challenging. But as a manager, are your motives, are they important? Should you be reliant on your, not reliant, but should you be more focused on your artist's motives? Because surely it's their career you're managing. So make sure you're in tune with their artists. So all those questions I think are so vitally important. For me, it was about showing passion and always thinking that there was someone behind me who was likely going to do the job. So always giving it my all, working hard, and just showing that passion. I've said passion a tremendous amount of times, but
it's important.
It's a simple word, but it holds so much vitality. You know, it's about connecting with that part of you that listened to music when you was at your happiest and your saddest, and thinking, I can play a part in creating music or working with an artist that will have that sort of impact on someone else. When I was 14 and listening to Siamese Dream by Smashing Pumpkins and thinking that there was no one in the world that understood me apart from Billy Corgan at that moment. And then when I meet people now who say, goodness me, Get Cape's debut album really changed my life, or Casually Dressed and Deep in Conversation by Funeral for a Friend, oh, look at my tattoo, that album meant the world to me. That shows that my passion meant something. And so, and you know what? If you feel that your passion is to make money, then I'm sure there's a podcast available to listen to someone else. That's not mine, but mine was to be happy and to make a difference. And one hopes I've managed to do that in even a small way. And my motive is now to continue doing that. But I feel that I've had my time in the music industry, and a fun time it was. And yeah, I learned a lot of lessons, but I feel now that I've hit 40 and starting a new career that I hope that my very, very best years are ahead of me.
And with the shop, do you have international clients, customers, sorry?
Yeah, I mean, we ship worldwide. We use Discogs. I think Royal Mail have just upped their postage for vinyl to America, which is very annoying.
Yes.
Yeah, with the shop, God, who knows? I've not really talked much about the shop, but it does bring me a tremendous amount of joy. It brings me a tremendous amount of joy, and I feel what I enjoy the most about it is buying someone's record collection and going through it. Because you can tell so much by someone by going through their record collection. And then finding really beautiful, rare records in it. That's a nice feeling. Really, really nice feeling. And then finding new owners for these records. That's a beautiful thing. I imagine that process will play a part in my life forthcoming. And every therapist I've ever met, they've always told me, make sure you have another passion. Because it can be very hard work just dealing with people's trauma every day, all day. So always have room for other passions. So I imagine that will be vinyl trading. I imagine it will be this shop in one guise or another. But at the moment it's so difficult to really differentiate the two. My music career, my training, my record collecting and my record shop, they all feel somewhat intertwined. But that's the complexities of life and what people are like. You know, you can't. I'm the omelette. You know, I can't separate the egg now. Can't get the flour. You know, it's all in there. So there you go. I am an omelette.
That's amazing. What a wonderful way to end this podcast. Good. Yeah. Okay. Well, I will put some links on the show notes. Thank you so much, Joel. You've given me so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it.
My absolute pleasure. Thanks for coming to Deepest Darkest Essex. Although I believe that you are from Essex.
I am indeed. Yes, I am.
Or you sound like you're from Essex.
I'm a local, so to speak. Yeah. Yeah. Very good.
Super.
Thank you again.
Very welcome.
All right. Well, that concludes this incredible story of Joel, the man who brought the world some very important artists and their music, but also, I hope, a real insight into a side of the industry you don't often get to hear about. One route through it, as much as an insight into how it is important to keep a focused and alert mind to running a business. To my listeners, Thank you for listening. Stay in touch with the show via my socials at Alex Branson on both Twitter and Instagram. Also, a shout out to the incredible audio assassins who have provided the music branding for the show. Link in the show notes.